I rather agree with Gary Lineker that it shouldn't be by politicians. The whole point of the BBC is that it is supposed to be independent of government. It's not a state broadcaster, it's a public broadcaster. And however well-intentioned the process is under the most enlightened of prime ministers, there's always going to be the suggestion of a taint around anyone appointed by the prime minister of the day. So I think it may be too difficult to change the process and appoint the next chair. But certainly, if it's not done this time, it should be done the next time but one.
It's a really interesting sort of conversation to be having, because what you say there about a sort of taint in the appointment process, I wonder if it's ever possible to have somebody untainted. So even if you were to remove it from the Prime Minister's appointment and their prerogative, is there anybody who is truly unbiased, completely impartial in the way that we hold the BBC up to be? That just feels unrealistic, doesn't it?
Well, there are appointments in public lives and in public life, and there are processes for appointing people to sensitive jobs. So it's not like it's never done. But the moment you bring the Prime Minister of the day into making the final choice, then, of course, there will always be a suspicion. But the problem with the Sharp appointment went back further, because what happened here was that the Prime Minister of the day, Boris Johnson, clearly signalled in advance by a series of leaks who he wanted not only to run the BBC, but to run the supposedly independent regulator, Ofcom. He wanted Charles Moore, Lord Moore, to be running the BBC, and Paul Dacre, ex-Daily Telegraph, to be running Ofcom. Now, the sheer fact of announcing who Downing Street wanted to appoint put off a lot of really good candidates. Only 9 people applied for the Ofcom job, because I think most decent candidates, and in fact I spoke to one or two at the time, they said, why would I apply for these jobs? It's obvious who's going to get it. And I'm just going to put myself through the humiliation of not getting it very publicly. So there was something absolutely tainted about the process for both those jobs. And that ought to be the signal that Sunak should be very, very careful about how he treads now.
One of my considerations with all of this is about whether having specifically the chairman of the BBC as a political process, whether in some ways that actually allows the light of day as disinfectant. Whereas if you were to remove it and set up a different process, is there a chance that you move the sleaze into the shadows and we never actually know about it?
Well, I think probably the answer with the BBC is to move it into a different kind of ownership structure, to remove it from any kind of government influence at all. And I think that's true of both Conservative and Labour governments. You saw the very unhappy episode which led to the Hutton report over Andrew Gilligan's report on the Iraq war intelligence, which led to the decoupling, the decapitation of both the chairman and the director general. And now we've lost another chair. So I think it would be a good thing to think about, which would be how to put the BBC beyond any kind of political influence. It's too important in our public life to become a kind of political football.
Yeah. In terms of the role of the BBC chair, how important is that person anyway? Does it feel like they have much influence on, the day-to-day things that we see on screen, or is this just a perception issue for the BBC?
Well, again, I think we're in an unfortunate position where Tim Davie, the Director General, who I think is very capable, but he doesn't come from an editorial background, a seasoned editorial background, and Richard Sharp was a banker. Now, I think one or other of those jobs could be done by somebody with no editorial background, but you can't have both of them. So, in a perfect world, I think you'd be looking for someone who has the kind of editorial skills and background that Tim Davie doesn't, to oversee the BBC and its processes and its integrity, and frankly to protect the BBC. I mean, when the Gary Lineker row was happening a couple of months ago, Richard Sharp was completely absent, and he should have been out there protecting the BBC. Or if he decided that it didn't deserve protection, he should have taken some other kind of action.